I don't know what they thought. It was something on the camera or whatever. No, I actually have a dent in my head. The dent in my head, I got attacked by the refrigerator. Now, I could make up some exotic story about defending, the house or the dog or truth and justice or whatever. But the truth is, my refrigerator attacked me. It's funny because I shut the refrigerator door, or thought I did. I pushed it like I normally do. And then I turned away to look at something or turn the light off or whatever. And then I turned back and the refrigerator door hadn't gone shut. You know how it has those little things to move over? Well, it hadn't quite gone over it. So it came back open. And when I turned around and stepped across, I just whacked full force, full on into that refrigerator door. And oh man, that hurt. I mean, we're talking almost tears in the eyes, whatever. But it didn't show up for a couple of days. And a couple of days later, why it got bigger and bigger. And I think yesterday was the very biggest day. It looks like it's just slightly smaller today. Anyway, I didn't do a live today to talk about the dent in my head. I want to talk about identity. Your identity is limiting your wealth. And, you may not agree with this, but I can tell you it's true. It doesn't matter. It's like you can disagree with the law of gravity, but it's still true. If you identify at a certain wealth level, then that's where you'll be. You'll hit a ceiling, you'll sabotage. Even events around you will happen to get in your way. If you identify truly as a billionaire or a centimillionaire or a decamillionaire, and that's 100 or 10, or millionaire, whatever, you'll have it and you'll get it. It will come to you. That's what all this stuff about quantum physics and prediction and attraction and all the rest means. Now, here's why that works. I didn't used to know this, of course, and I used to live identifying as a person who made 50,000 a year and then 60 and then 80. And, gradually as my progression in the workforce moved, and this is back in the 80s and, so 40 years ago, and then in the 90s, and I was doing well. I had a nice salary. I had a good job that paid well and paid extra overtime, not at union cents, but extra time. And so I was making good money. And I knew a lot of people with me that made a career out of the position that I had. And I identified as someone that did that. In fact, I didn't think about identifying as a millionaire at the time. I didn't understand that mechanics. So I did my budget planning and my horizon and my life plan. I did a 10-year plan, 401k, put this amount of money aside, and I did all that stuff. And I identified as a hardworking, middle management type person that was closing in on six figures pretty quick. And I was going to make that. And that's who I was. In my mind and in my behavior, not in a negative way. I didn't sit around and pout. I knew there were people that made more, and my boss and his boss and the director and the CEO and stuff like that. And I knew that. And sometimes I thought, wow, I think I could do that. I should have that kind of money. But I had an identity and I lived into it. Budgeting, planning, working, spending, saving, not buying things or buying things, depending on all that stuff. And my identity was absolutely limiting my money, and so is yours. So what does it take to identify as a millionaire or a decamillionaire or a centimillionaire or a billionaire? What does it take to be that person? Well, first of all, do you know anything about how a millionaire thinks, or a billionaire reasons, or stewards resources, or acquires resources, or what kind of investments they do and don't look at? Do you know anything about that? If you're like me, the answer is, no, why would I? Well, that's part of identifying as that. And identifying it doesn't mean a statement. I identify as a carrot. Oh, okay, so you're a carrot. Where's the potato peeler? Let me scrape the skin off. That isn't truth. When I identify as an athlete, I naturally work out. And by identify, it isn't a piece of language. It is a spiritual, energetic ownership of that thing. Okay? And you can have the strategy, but you know what? The strategy to make 100K and $1 million are the same. What? The strategies to make 100K and $1 million are the same, with about 2% or 3% variation. The day-to-day activities aren't very different at all. Those differences compound, but the thing that gets in the way is your flippin' identity. You don't believe. Or you either don't think about it, and that is almost, that's not quite the worst. The worst is I thought about it and I decided there's no way I can have it. That's the worst energy. I don't think about it means I'm stuck in the matrix, right? And I'm just living in that truth of, oh, well, that's just who I am, right? Studying the lives, the stories, the rise, the decisions, the choices, the work, how people seek opportunities and chances they do or don't take, all of that is part of identifying or becoming a millionaire or decamillionaire, centimillionaire, billionaire. And I toss those numbers around, each one times 10. You know, 6 figures, once upon a time, that was a big deal. Today, if you're not making 6 figures, you're not making ends meet, or you're struggling to do it, or you better have a spouse or a partner to supplement, because 100K US is barely getting by these days. That's my opinion, and I know lots of people get by on less than that. So in my own trajectory, then some things happened. A couple of opportunities came. This is in my 30-year career in the energy industry. For the first 15 years, for the first 15, 16 years, I identified as where I was. I just believed that, and that was the box I lived in. And in about year 17, some things started changing, some regulatory things, and the industry began changing in a pretty significant way. And all of a sudden, I saw opportunities where I hadn't before. All of a sudden, it wasn't just seeing the opportunities. It was, you know what? I can do that. I think I can do that. I think there's something I can do in that new realm. I'll bet I can do that. I'll bet I can make an inroad. And so then I began believing, and I'm using the word identify. I know that's cliche these days, and I don't want to use it. So I began believing I had a different opportunity. I began believing maybe I could do this, or maybe I could do that. Hey, so I started thinking differently. That meant I started looking for opportunities. I started looking for jobs, different jobs, but I looked at them differently because I believed I was a different person. Now, I didn't go to some seminar and have some big wake-up call. I've had some of those later, and that's what I do now as a coach, is I help you find those and live into them. Because me, it took some accidental externalities, and of course there are no accidents, but it took some externalities to push me in the direction of believing that there was that possibility. What I know now for sure is you can create those. I didn't understand that then. You can create those energies, those externalities, and those opportunities out of thin air, practically. And the reason, it's not because you're magic, although you are, it is because they're all over the place. We're just not seeing them. You know how they have put those blinders on horses so they don't get distracted? Well, you have blinders on. I did. I don't know you personally, but you probably do. Unless you're living your ultimate life. If you're living a life that you say, it's perfect, I love every single day, I'm living the ultimate life. And I define that as purpose, prosperity, and joy. And you can have your own 3 or 6 or 12 words. But I live that, and it is by creation. I want you to hear that. It wasn't by those externalities. My first taste of understanding that came from some externalities. And then I looked in, but then I pursued them. I looked for other jobs. I applied for other jobs. I went to interviews. I flew to different cities and even different countries. And I thought, I think there's a place for this. And so I gradually, over 3 or 4 years, began to create these opportunities. And then in my mind, I believed I was a different person. I believed then, and really, that I had this huge potential. And for the moment, I was in this situation and I wasn't mad about it. It was still the same job. I was still getting promotions and getting raises and everything, annually. And it was good money, etc. But I stopped doing the calculations based on incremental things and years to retirement and all that stuff that you think about when you're going to work for a company 25, 30, 35, 40 years or whatever. I stopped thinking about that and started thinking about a different trajectory. And because I did, I started seeing different things. So here's truth number 1. A hustler identity has limits. And I'll tell you why. Because no matter how hard you hustle or I hustle, how hard we work, we run up against fatigue, time, and other commitments that we've made. If you have a family, you either choose to ignore them or you sacrifice time. Now, I know a guy right now who's an entrepreneur who makes good money, and he says flat out, I could make twice the money I'm making right now. But that would require that I sacrifice, trade my time tokens, and leave out family and kids and things, and he won't do that. So that's an intentional trade. But the limit is still there, okay, because we all have 168 hours and we can't go with no sleep. And even if we could, what kind of life is that? So the hustle thing is good. I'm not saying don't hustle and don't make, try hard. What I'm saying is there's a limit to that, a natural limit. And you have to understand that. And it works for a while and then it traps you. And then there's a owner investor of a business. Now, you could get promotions and get way up in the executive suite. And eventually I did, because I changed my mind, meaning how I thought. I eventually did get promotions to C-suite positions, and I made money accordingly. And it was 10 times what I was making before, literally 10x. And I'm like, wow. But I still had the thought, there is another 10x. If I can do this 10x, then what's the next 10x look like? Right? And then I quit and left that industry 18 years ago in 2007, 19 years ago now, and began, exploring again another layer, because what's the limit? When you realize it has nothing to do with your hours and hustle, you realize there is no limit. Because when you start thinking like that, then you get other people involved, and you get armies of people working with you or for you, or in joint ventures or partnerships or those kinds of things. But you don't even think about those things when you're stuck in one place. So the thing I'm inviting you to do today is to reach out to me if you want to. Let me show you what I did, and let me help you do it also. There's a place, Kellen Flukiger Media. My name, Kellen Flukiger, right down here at the bottom. You do have to spell it right. Kellen Flukiger Media. There's a contact form there. And if you're curious, I'll tell you more about the dent in my head, but you probably don't care about that. But if you do want to know how to 10x where you are right now, that is available. I've done it once, and I'm in the process of doing it again right now, and it's working. Love you. See you tomorrow. Don't let your mind, your thought, lock you at far less than is available to you. See you tomorrow.